Hello, welcome back to episode 22 of the IRL F1 podcast with me, Gareth, and as always, Sab. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. We've come up to our final podcast of the season. Doesn't seem too long ago we were starting our first podcast, and we've been on a great journey so far. We've had some great laughs. You've tormented me with the questions at the end, and now we're here pretty much reviewing how the season's gone as a whole, and obviously we'll be discussing our favourite races, each of the races and the drivers, and we'll also be discussing how we've been racing this week in Invictus as well. So it should be a good fun evening tonight.
Yeah, and as you say, it's been a fantastic season here doing a podcast. First time, of course, is something that Sab and I moved into back in June, actually, that we first came up with reviving the Invictus F1 podcast back from the dead. And so we do give a massive thanks to all the guys that are listening, to downloading the podcast and off all the streaming sites, of course, and equally the guys that come and join us on a Thursday night watching on YouTube. And we do it. We just like to chat about Formula One, and the fact that we can give you lot guys a little bit of entertainment whilst we're doing it just brings a little bit of joy to my heart on a Thursday evening. But yeah, I mean, as you say, Sab, this one is going to be essentially not just the season finale for F1, but it's also the season finale for us. We'll be going off the air until mid-February when we're back for a special pre-season testing. Although a little birdie tells me that we might have a Christmas special coming up in 2 weeks' time. But for F1 2019, this will be us done after this evening. So make sure, guys, if you are listening, of course, to download it afterwards, and let us know if you've enjoyed them, and equally what's been your favourite moment of the podcast over the last half a year or so as we've been doing this. But
Well,
yeah, I know it doesn't feel like it, does it? And
no, it doesn't.
but we'll go straight into it because there's a lot to pick through for this week. And of course the review, we will be essentially grading every race and every driver and the season as a whole from A through to F. And we'll kick off with the races, and we'll go all the way back to March in the start of this year, and the Australian Grand Prix, and one that you were able to actually go out and attend once again,
Yeah.
Sab.
I always highly recommend going to the Australian Grand Prix if you can. I know, being at this side of the world, it's extremely difficult to get over there, but it's one not just for the race, but it's really great to watch for everything else. And for me, though, this year's Australian Grand Prix is probably one of the worst ones I've been to. I've luckily been to several, and I'm going to be rating this as a D, just because we were all going in there expecting Ferrari. We thought were going to be monumental from pre-season testing, and they're going to really give it to Mercedes, and it ended up being a Mercedes walkover in the end, and not really much else happened in the race from what I remember being trackside. So yeah, I'm going to give that a rating of a D.
Yeah, I mean, I've got it slightly better. I've got it at a C grade. But yeah, it was a very, very average race. Yeah, like you said, it was really disappointing. I mean, well, probably not if you're a Mercedes fan, but if you were a general F1 fan, that we saw in pre-season that Ferrari looked like they were going to be pretty strong, and it must have looked to them as though if they were going to challenge going into Melbourne. But 57 seconds Seb Vettel finished behind Valtteri, who actually took the pole, and no, Lewis took the pole, and Valtteri went and took the victory. But to be almost a minute off the pace. And then equally, I believe it was even the first race of the season when you saw that little spark of rivalry between himself and Charles Leclerc, and Charles Leclerc actually on much better tyres asking if he was allowed to overtake Seb, and the team telling him to hold position because there was no point. They were always going to finish fourth and fifth. It didn't really matter where either one of them finished. So it's for me. Um, Average start to the season. What about Bahrain round two?
Yeah, I've gone with a C for Bahrain simply because even though it was another Mercedes 1-2, it was a race of almost winning for Charles Leclerc. He was superb all weekend, and he thoroughly deserved to get that race victory, as we've probably discussed in the past. And fortunately, that issue with his engine cost him that. And the reason why I gave it a bit better grade than Australia was we got to see what Charles can potentially do in this Ferrari in this race, and if it wasn't for that engine issue, he'd have definitely took the race victory. So I'm giving it a C.
Yeah, I mean, I've got it the same, but it's slightly lower. I've got it as a C minus, purely on a little bit with the head, a little bit of the heart here, and which I'm trying to be as objective as possible when it comes to these. But it was so gutting when he lost a drive. I believe it was with the MG UK. And he was just losing power and power and power, and he had such a, it was like a 12 14 second lead he had over Lewis Hamilton in second position at the time, and Lewis was gaining, I think it was something like 3.5 4 seconds a lap at one point. And I mean, luckily for Charles, that really really weird double retirement for Renault, where both engines seemed to switch off at exactly the same time with about 3 laps left to go, meant that VSC essentially saved him, and meant that he would finish on the podium, because it was most likely he would have finished outside the point if not. But yeah, minus for me, because as you say, it was a race of what could have beens, and Charles really deserved it that weekend. Um, Round three, over to China. What have you got for the Chinese Grand Prix?
I've gone with a C. I'll be honest, I don't remember much of the Chinese Grand Prix, and I remember falling asleep watching it. And I've only gone with a C just because I'm trying to remain pretty much new to it. I'll be honest, I don't remember much of the race apart from the fact that Lewis and Valtteri both taking first and second in the race again, with Seb Vettel third. So. Not the best races. Obviously, it doesn't sound good if I'm falling asleep to it, but you can forgive me slightly for it being on in the early hours of Sunday morning. So yes, grade C.
Yeah, I've got it as the same. I got it as a C. Um, quite a distinct average race, I think. Another 1-2 for Mercedes, which I'm sure you will remember, highlighted the at least first third of the season. It was one of the first races of the season which really highlighted the lack of, or the disparity between Max Verstappen and Pierre Gasly. Max finishing 27 seconds behind the race leader of Lewis Hamilton. Gasly 89 seconds, also almost a minute and a half off the pace. And so yeah, it wasn't a great race. Probably the highlight for me, and it's probably one of the drives that caught the eye of Helmut Marko, was Alex Albon finishing in 10th position after starting in the pit lane. That was it was good to see from someone that's followed him through the junior formulas, to see him go and have that fight where he did overtake a few. Of course, it was the Chinese Grand Prix which had the issue at the start with Lando, which then spurned the memes that came out of that. Lando's first really big meme with the shooting stars one, with him getting sent to the sky by one of the Toro Rossos, I think it was. But yeah, it's a C grade for me. On to Azerbaijan, round four.
Yeah, and again, yet another Mercedes 1-2, wasn't it? I've gone with a C again for this race. I didn't particularly enjoy this race. I thought there was a possibility of maybe Ferrari doing something. Charles Leclerc was looking super racy, wasn't he, in qualifying, until he decided to crash at the castle section, and the I Am Stupid video clips surfaced on the internet. It was won by Valtteri Bottas, and you thought at this point, the reason why I gave it a C and probably not a D, was you thought at this point that we could actually have Lewis being challenged by his teammate this year, and Bottas looking like he could really step up this year. And at this point you're thinking, oh, could we possibly get it? And as we later found out, it didn't really surface. But at that time, we thought we might just have a title challenge for Lewis. It wasn't just going to be walkover. So that's the reason why I gave it a C. Probably in my opinion, it could be a D as well. It weren't a great race in my opinion.
No, I mean I've got it as a C plus. I thought, yeah, much the same as you. I thought there was a little bit of promise in the end result with Valtteri picking up the win, which meant I think he left Azerbaijan for sure in the lead of the championship, and we saw for the first time Lewis kind of take notice to the fact that he might actually have to put a little bit more effort in this season. So I think after Azerbaijan, it kind of kicked into gear a little bit and made him start chasing those wins and chasing those pole positions, because Valtteri was definitely on the level with him in the early start of the season, and equally you saw Valtteri was sort of similar in the end part of the season where he was picking up some better results as well. It was just that middle part that's probably cost him the championship. But yeah, I've got Azerbaijan as a C plus. A good race for the Mercedes once again. 1-2 on the podium, finished a second and a half apart. Seb on the podium once again. Checo down in sixth position. Good result for Racing Point. Racing Points always seem to be strong around Azerbaijan, and equally Sergio Perez seems to like it as well. He's finished on the podium there before, and yeah, it was not a great race, not anything remarkable, but a C plus for me. Spain, what have you got for Spain round 5?
Spain, I have got it as a D. Spain. Again, I did not enjoy this race whatsoever. Just you thought it could be so much more, and I think the Spanish Grand Prix it it's usually the start of, isn't it, of the European season when they bring in all their upgrades and everything else, and yeah, I can see why there was potential rumours of it coming off the calendar. It wasn't great. Mercedes 1-2 once again, and with Max finishing third. I got to this point where I'm thinking, I'll be honest, I got to this point in the season where I'm thinking this season's going to be done by mid-August. It's all going to be wrapped up by mid-August the way it was going, and yeah, it just petered out, I think, the race for me, and it was one of those I just kind of glad it ended, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree. It was Spain is it's a very strange circuit. It's a good test circuit. I don't think it's a great race circuit. I don't think it's the layout is not particularly conducive to super close racing. It was another Mercedes 1-2. Of course, you saw that incident with Lando and Lance Stroll that ended his race early, which was a shame because he was. But I mean, equally, both McLarens weren't particularly superb in Spain either. But
No.
yeah, it was very run of the mill race. I've equally given it a D. Not saying that I'm gonna miss. I would miss Spain off the calendar, which is it was one of those tracks where I was like, you know what, if it did leave, I wouldn't be too upset. One of the cheapest to go to, but unfortunately not one of the most entertaining to watch. Talk about entertaining to watch. Monaco. What have you got for Monaco?
Yeah, this again was for me one of the probably, no, I won't say the worst, but it's down there near the bottom. I have also got a D for Monaco. Hamilton obviously taking the victory with Vettel not far behind and Bottas in third. I think the problem with Monaco, and we've highlighted this in the past when we've discussed street circuits, is I think with how big the cars are now and how tight Monaco street circuit is, I think it's just becoming too difficult now to get moves done around this circuit, and unless the cars start becoming small again to the point where it is easy to overtake around there, it's just going to be a train, and once again it was pretty much a train round there again, and I can imagine it's going to be exactly the same next year. So for me, I love the glitz and glamour of Monaco. It's always fascinating, but the race itself's never great, so that's why I've gone with a D.
No, I've gone for a D plus as well. Like you say, I'm a big fan of the fact that it is the jewel in the crown of Formula One. It is this race that everyone wants to win. Of course, it's the local race for most F1 drivers. Alex Albon's actually moving out of his mum's house this in between seasons and moving to Monaco. So yeah, it's going to gain another Formula One driver as part of its population. But yeah, it wasn't great. It's the last few seasons hasn't given us sort of these races where you like, even in the past, I think we've seen races where it's been a bit of a procession, but you've had this maybe one car chasing down another, and I think you hark back to, I think it was like the mid 2000 or maybe even 2004, 2005. I can't remember which one it was, but it was Jarno Trulli leading Jenson Button, and Jenson was doing all he could to chase him down, and that made it genuinely quite exciting. But yeah, these, like you said, these cars, they're so wide, and the streets are so narrow. It hasn't changed, and I mean, there's been talk about changing the layout of the Monaco Grand Prix for quite a while now, and I know the Prince of Monaco has talked about maybe going left at Portier and going down the seafront a little bit further, and then looping back around and making it a little bit longer, which would then extend the straight towards the tunnel. But yeah, it wasn't remarkable. It was another another good result for Mercedes. But yeah, for us, I think that the problem for Formula One is that people are starting with these cars as they are. It's, I think, with the V6 turbo hybrids, you could kind of, it people kind of getting worn down by sort of the sound around Monaco, because I think you could get away back in the days with when you had V8s and V10s by the fact that you'd have these cars screaming their way around the streets. But now it's not so much. It's obviously they are incredibly loud. Both of us have witnessed those this season, but it's not quite this. It doesn't have quite the same aura with these cars going around a street circuit. So I think now that we're in this V6 era, that it's kind of, the fans are somewhat coming to not dislike Monaco, but it's maybe not the one that people were kind of pinpointing on their calendar for one to watch each season.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, for me, you might agree or disagree, but I actually prefer now watching qualifying for the Monaco Grand Prix rather than the race, because that is, you get to see them pushing to their absolute limits to try and get the perfect lap around there, and they're always trying to push as close to the barriers as possible. And like we've seen Max a few times around Monaco, just getting it slightly wrong and going into barrier, it's those millimeters. And when they're pushing to the absolute limit, the minimum fuel, and absolutely going for it, that's when I really enjoy it. When it comes to the race, it's all about tyre management and saving fuel, saving other bits and bobs, and it gets a bit tedious and boring. So it's a shame that I enjoy the qualifying more, but it is much better seeing them absolutely going for that perfect lap around Monaco.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, Saturday is probably, out of the entire season, more exciting than Sunday. So yeah, I would agree with that sentiment there. And equally, with the race, of course, was Charles Leclerc being the only Monegasque in Formula One, and he had an absolute disaster of a race. So for the locals, it wasn't great. So yeah, it wasn't a great season in Monaco this year. But on to Canada, where we had our first main and sort of real bit of controversy in the season. And what have you given Canada for your grade?
I've given Canada a B, because I think up to this point in the season, I think it was possibly the best race so far. We had Ferrari decide to turn up for a race and really give it to Mercedes, and Sebastian Vettel. We ain't going to go down this road again, because we've obviously discussed it in depth in previous podcasts. But that slight mistake, what cost him the race victory, gave us plenty of drama after a race, didn't it, when he was swapping the boards around as well. But I also wanted to point out the fact that further down, it was also Renault's best race this season. I think they came in 6th and 7th that day. The car really suited to that track, and yeah, not a great deal happened in the race, but I think because it was a lot closer at the front, fighting at the front, and we saw Ferrari deciding to turn up this season with Charles Leclerc eventually coming home in third to give Ferrari, I think it was their best result of the season so far. So see Ferrari actually take it to Mercedes, even though they didn't eventually win the race because of that penalty. It was refreshing, and people actually decided, yeah, we might actually have a race season now. So that's the reason why I'm giving it a B.
Yeah, I mean, I've got it as a C. It was the fight between Lewis and Seb was nice. It was finally good to see Ferrari actually decide to give it a go in the championship. But yeah, like you said, we've gone through that penalty so many times, and what it did for Seb with his mindset for the next few races as well. And obviously, you know that he really kind of dropped off, and it was the first sort of inkling where people so is he going to retire at the end of the season? Because that's really when he kind of started to switch off, and it's not until really Singapore that he kind of came back and started smiling again. But yeah, as you said, really good race for Renault, and this I think was the race where the tide really turned on Pierre Gasly. Finished down in 8th position, a lap down. I believe he was lapped by, or was he lapped by his teammate? He may have even
Yes,
been.
I think he was, yeah.
And it was. I think this is sort of the point in the season where, and we're only what 7 races in or something like that, and people are already going, oh, he's not good enough. He's not good enough. And I mean, as the season progressed and he went back to Toro Rosso, and we found out that he kind of maybe he is better when he's in the Toro Rosso, and we know that his driving style suited the Toro Rosso more than it did because of course the Red Bull was set up more for how Max drives, and Pierre is a lot more aggressive apparently on the brakes compared to how Max is, so he couldn't quite get the braking setup right. But yeah, it was a bad result for him, which I think probably cost him, or at least, well, had that feeling in the back of Red Bull's mind that maybe he wasn't the right man for the job. So yeah, we went from Canada, which was a C, over to France, and what have you got for the French Grand Prix?
Well, can we make this swift? I'm just going to say F. It was easily the worst race of the year. Even though, just being biased, my team actually had a good race. Carl Sainz coming in 6th, and Lando unfortunately had an issue and eventually dropped down to 9th. But apart from that, the race was absolutely dreadful, and it is easily the worst race of the season. I know you will disagree with me, probably disagree with me on that later on, but for me, just terrible. It's just I just thought at this point, because I don't know if you remember, but I can remember people going overboard on social media and news articles and all sorts, saying Formula One is in crisis, and they cannot go on like this, and France, yes, was dreadful, but I think, as we'll be discussing shortly, it proves that you don't need to knee-jerk react to one bad race, and yeah, this was one of those races we should definitely try and forget about quickly.
Yeah, and you know, saying that they're not having a knee-jerk reaction, there's actually been quite news coming out of the bosses from the French Grand Prix talking about the fact that they might dramatically change the layout for next season to try and change the opinion of the many, because it doesn't kind of inspire you, the French Grand Prix, its layout, its design that's in the middle of apparently it's an absolute nightmare to get to, but yep, I mean, I've gone exactly the same as you. It was F. It was so boring. The drivers didn't like it. You could tell the drivers weren't a fan of it. Everyone after the race, like you said, on social media was just calling for its head and saying that it should be removed from the calendar. And I'm not saying it should, but it definitely needs something to re-energize it, because it wasn't a great race to watch at all. Lewis won an absolute canter to Valtteri, and then behind, like you said, it was a good race with Carlos finishing in 6th position. I think, was it Lando's highest grid start? I think, was he 5th on the grid?
Yeah, it was, yes,
Yeah, because that's when Seb was going through that period where he didn't qualify in the top 5 or top 6 or something like that for 3 or 4 races. And of course Lando once again going viral with his dancing in the cockpit as he's waiting for the race to start.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's It was not a great race, and when you're looking at viral memes from drivers on the grid before the races even start as the highlight of the race, you know that that is the reason why it has earned itself its the first F grade of the season. But we went from that, and we had this sort of, I'd say up to France, we had not a great season. And I think everyone was saying, well, the championship's over already. Mercedes have absolutely walked it because of course, Mercedes finished 1-2 every race for the first 5 races, I think it was. And then they still won every race up until the Austrian Grand Prix. And the Austrian Grand Prix, much better. What have you given it?
Oh, it's one of my favourite races of the season. It could be an A. I'm giving it a B plus. It was absolutely fantastic. Max Verstappen, mighty Max, with most of his Dutch contingent there cheering him on like they always are at the Red Bull Ring. It was a superb race for him. Charles Leclerc, agonisingly close, wasn't he, to getting that first race victory, and Max with that move, what unfortunately took the race stewards quite a long time to decide whether it was legal or not, but they eventually did, and Max thoroughly deserved that race victory, and it was the first victory for Honda in this hybrid era as well. So yeah, not just at the front, but throughout the whole field, we saw some superb battling all the way through, and at that point, easily the best race, and it was, in my opinion, it was a great comeback from F1 after what seemed like a disaster in France. It was a great comeback, and a great way to put on a show and say, look, F1 isn't so bad. It's just maybe down to layouts of tracks and this, that, and other. And the Austrian Grand Prix, it's not the first time it's given us a great race, is it, in F1? And this will easily be one of the best this season, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a track that's pretty much straights and right-handers, you know that you're going to get some decent overtaking. I think that's what we had, and Austria was one of the was the best race of the season up to that point. Like you said, after the duo of France and Canada, where Canada you had this sort of split in the fandom between, was Seb in the right, was he in the wrong, and then equally you went and had that absolute dull race in France, that it really needed this race in Austria, and yeah, that late move from Max on Charles, and it was everything F1 needed. And oh yeah, I've given it a B. Could be a B. It could even scratch up to an A. The only reason I haven't going for an A is because I think there are some spectacular races later in the season that probably deserved a slightly higher grade than Austria. Good result for McLaren in 6th position with Lando Norris. Pierre Gasly once again finishing outside of the top 6 and 7th, so it wasn't a great race for him. Both the Alphas in the points as well, because in the first half of the season the Alphas are actually doing pretty nicely. Kimi Raikkonen was solidly in the points of the majority of the opening half of the season. It was only the second half of the season he really started to fall back a little bit, but yeah, I think Austria definitely worthy of a B grade, and it's a track hopefully I'm going to be road tripping to next season. So
Nice.
going to try and drive across Europe if I can and get to it, because it does look like it's a pretty good one to go to. But Silverstone is one that many of you will have been to. Of course, many of our listeners I know have gone there and watched races before. And what have you got Silverstone, Great Britain, for the
I've got
grading?
that. I've got that a B. Even though it was pretty much in the end a Mercedes 1-2 victory, it was much more than that. We had superb battles throughout the whole race. It just never seemed to end. You just wanted more and more of this race. I wouldn't quite say it was the same as good as Austria, but it was definitely very, very good. You had the insert, I think it was down at Club Corner with Max and Seb colliding into each other when Seb drove into the side of Max and punted Max off the track. But it was a race as well, which at that point was Pierre Gasly's best result of the season, and he was in his short Red Bull career, coming home in 4th. He was absolutely delighted with that. It took advantage of Max having that problem, and with Charles coming in 3rd, on paper you look at it and think it's a Mercedes 1-2 victory. It's not that much, but overall it's definitely a race you could easily watch back. It was very fun to watch. So yeah, B for me.
Yeah, completely agree with that. I've got or Great Britain as a B as well. I think it was a really, really fun race to watch. Like you said, you had the incident with Max and Seb, but what people may not remember is there was that absolutely brilliant fight between Max and Charles Leclerc in the first half of the race as well. With those two, after the incident in Austria, and Charles had said, "Well, if that's how we're going to race, if that's how we're allowed to race, then you know what, I'm going to race like that as well." And hit both of them elbows out and making dives and moves and throwing it around, and were probably just about tiptoeing on the line of what was acceptable, but it was fantastic between them. And it was a real shame for Max that unfortunately Seb just misjudged that braking point going into club corner at the end of the lap. But yeah, Lewis, another win in Silverstone, just a homegrown talent and that becoming absolute legend, multiple race wins in Silverstone. And this is sort of that turning point in the season, that middle point here where he really started to turn the screw. I think he even got the fastest lap on the last lap of the race on old tyres, which showed how dominant he was that evening. So yeah, I've got it as a B. I thought it was a really fun race, and this is the point of the season. I think this middle point, like sort of the second third and the middle third of the season, where we had race after race after race that seemed to be brilliant, and we went from Great Britain having this, what I've got as a B, onto Germany. And I don't know what you've got for Germany, but it's one of the best of the season.
Well, this is one of two races I missed this year, and you're going to find out later that you're probably going to want me to miss more races, because for me, Germany is the second best race we have had this season. It had everything, didn't it? I had to re-watch the whole race because I was at the Silverstone Classic that weekend. It was a home race for Mercedes, and a home race they would definitely want to forget. We saw just pretty much everything, and Max Verstappen in the end took the victory in very tricky conditions. We saw Sebastian Vettel come home in second, and a very surprising Danny Kvyat in third, with Lance Stroll fourth and Carlos Sainz fifth. Now, if I'd have said to you before that weekend that had been your top five, you'd have probably told me where to go. It was just one of those races, wasn't it, where you could just literally sit and discuss it for another hour of everything what happened. You had all those cars going off at that drag strip part, which was like glass, and the track going wet to dry and wet again. It literally had everything, and yeah, definitely for me the second best race of the year. Absolutely superb. It was, like I say, a race to forget for Mercedes in the home race, but I'm giving that an A.
Yeah, I equally, I've got it as an A. I thought this was one of the most fun races, and I don't think it was one of the best races, but it was so much fun to watch because you had no idea what was going to happen, and that's what happens when we have rain-affected races, is that it kind of all gets turned. And we had Danny Kvyat finishing on the podium in third position, just lost out with a lap to go, but to Seb going up into second. You had Lance Stroll in fourth position, which, granted, he has got his detractors, but he's finished on the podium once before, and he's started on the front row in a few seasons ago in Italy, and so he seems to do well in the wet. Carlos Sainz in fifth, Alex Albon before he moved to Red Bull when he was at Toro Rosso in sixth position. Lewis, of course, having that issue late on where he went off onto the, like you said, onto the drag strip area, lost the front wing. Then he had that really long pit stop because they couldn't work out what tyres to put him on. You had spins for Max Verstappen in the race and still carried on because they put him on dry tyres and it wasn't dry weather. Obviously, Valtteri putting it in the wall, Charles putting it in the wall. Nico Hulkenberg probably cost himself a podium, which of course would have been his only. It was just so much fun to watch, and of course, we don't want to understate this. Williams got a point because of Alfa Romeo's disqualification post race. So Williams' only point of the season, and it went to Robert Kubica. So yeah, it was one race that I don't think will be forgotten for a while, because it was an absolute joy to watch. It was so much fun. But we went from Germany, and we went over to Hungary, and we had an equally good race in Hungary. What have you got for that?
Hungary was a great race for completely different reasons, I thought. I wouldn't obviously say it's as good as the previous two, but I gave it a B simply because we started to see what a Hamilton Max Verstappen battle could be like. And fair play to Mercedes, they got their strategy absolutely bang on, didn't they, to beat Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen, I believe, got pole position that weekend as well, so he had another great race. It was unfortunate for Max because when Lewis decided to do Mercedes decided to do this strategy, it caught Red Bull out a bit, and it's not often you hear that, is it? Red Bull usually sharp as attack when it comes to making last minute strategy calls, but absolute superb battle for the lead between Max and Verstappen, and it was also one of a surprise as well, because Sebastian Vettel, even though he came home in third, was 60 plus seconds behind Lewis Hamilton, which is astonishing, really. You thought, Ferrari, what on earth has happened to them? And for me as well, it was another race on the superb form of Carlos Sainz. He got a brilliant fifth place, and this period of the F1 season really brought him up and shown him what he's capable of in that McLaren, and thoroughly deserved the fifth place and come out, I'm sure it was this race, with the smooth operator singing. So yeah, absolutely a superb race for many other reasons. We had the craziness of Germany and the overtakes of Austria, but this race was a if I can say it, a superb race based on strategy. So I'm giving it a B.
Yeah, I've got it as a B minus. I thought it was equally a really really good race. You had that strategy call from Lewis, and he didn't know, he did his usual Lewis thing of just doubting himself. And Lewis is the one of the most pessimistic people I've ever heard. He just complains on the radio, but it's not really complaining. It's almost like self motivation of telling himself that something's going to wrong, so he has to push harder. And this was sort of the fruits of that labour of him realising that he had to put in what was reminisce of Michael Schumacher's 20 qualifying laps back in the late 1990s, I think it was, but it was yeah, it was brilliant to watch Lewis overhaul Max with a few laps left to go, and equally Charles Leclerc and Seb Vettel having the first fight that they'd really kind of been allowed to have. Seb having much better tyres at the end, being able to get past Charles Leclerc. Yeah, that was another really fun race in Hungary. But we went from Hungary over to Belgium, and it was a very, very different race for Belgium. I had absolutely disastrous and tragic moments happening, of course, in the F2 race where we lost Antoine Hubert, and Juan Manuel Correa had a life-changing incident as well as part of that crash. And what have you got for the Belgian Grand Prix?
I've given it a B because Charles Leclerc eventually took his first race victory of the season. He'd been teasing it up to that point, hadn't he, of claiming a race victory, and you just thought, is he going to be unlucky not to get one? But he was superb after all what happened with the F2 race. His good friend Antoine Hubert and the emotions he must have been going through in that race. He was absolutely superb. I think he got pole position as well, and all weekend I think there was nobody really touching Charles Leclerc. It was like he had an extra edge about him that weekend. He claimed it ahead of Lewis Hamilton in second and Bottas third, with his teammate, who I think, if I remember rightly, Seb was in front of Charles for a while after the pit stop phase, but Seb eventually allowed Charles to go past and eventually claimed the win. And it was equally a good weekend for Alex Albon, who stepped into the Red Bull for the first time, and he claimed P5. So yeah, it was a good race, Belgium. It was. I think the whole F1 community, it was absolutely superb what they did with Antoine Hubert, and remembering him, and the applause on lap 19 from the crowd. That was absolutely superb as well. So yeah, a B for me. A very good race, and one I think Charles will remember for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, a desperately, desperately sad weekend. We've talked about before. I'm a massive fan of the junior formers F2 and F3, and I'd watched Antoine Hubert for a few years previous, and it was so sad when it happened. And I mean, I've given the race an A, and probably this is more with my heart rather than my head, as I did earlier. And this was the mental strength that Charles Leclerc needed to take this race win after losing one of his best friends, and of course Pierre Gasly, equally his roommate essentially with Anton Hubert, to be able to race and finishing the points after being demoted as well. So yeah, it was a really sore weekend for the racing community. It was, and like you said, it was so nice to see everyone come together, and not just Formula One, but you saw some beautiful tributes from the likes of the guys out at IndyCar, NASCAR, and all the way through, of course, MotoGP, and it was such a sad weekend, but it was. If anyone had to win, and it wasn't going to be Pierre Gasly, it had to be Charles Leclerc, and he did it. And yeah, so I've given it an A purely on that. Is that it was a remarkable win for him. And yeah, so then we go from an incredibly sad weekend in Spa, and we go to Monza, double heading, and going over to Monza. And what have you got? The Italian Grand Prix.
I've gone with a B for the Italian Grand Prix. It was superb, and in terms of Ferrari at home at Monza, and when Ferrari are on top form at home at Monza, whether you like Ferrari or not, it is just something absolutely amazing, and you yourself would be able to tell us better than most being there. But to watch it on TV and hear the crowd roar as Charles Leclerc was defending all he possibly can against a very fierce Lewis Hamilton, and to bring it home for the first time since Fernando Alonso, a race victory for Ferrari at Monza, was a very special moment for Ferrari and Charles Leclerc. And I'm sure all the Italians will remember this race for a very long time. Because you don't know whether they're going to do it again. And Charles Leclerc, he was desperate to hold on to it, wasn't he? With all his defending, he got the black and white flag during the race as well. But ultimately, it paid off and race victory for him. So yeah, fantastic for him, fantastic for Ferrari. A B for me, and I'm sure you thoroughly enjoyed it.
I mean, I'm slightly biased here. This has actually got an A plus for me. This race was brilliant from the lights out to checkered flag. It was so good to watch, and it is like you said. I was there, and I had the opportunity to sit just opposite the pit exit, so right in the middle of the Tifosi. And I think it gives you the reason why it's got that A plus is because I obviously had a completely different view of it compared to when you're watching on TV. And maybe if I was watching on TV, I wouldn't have given it as high a mark. But being in the middle of that crowd, watching Charles Leclerc lap after lap, and just I was actually front row of the stands, and people would run to the edge of the barrier as Charles Leclerc came through lap after lap after lap, screaming his name, and then listening to the Italian commentator at the circuit that was commentating on the race, commentate the final lap, was just he was commentating with tears in his voice, and it was just brilliant. And I've never ever been a Ferrari fan, and it was, but even I was kind of hoping that Lewis didn't get him in the end, because it was just brilliant. It was for my first Grand Prix to attend. It was incredible. The atmosphere, the people. I was fortunate enough. I say I was fortunate. My fiance was fortunate enough that I got engaged at the race in the pre-race as well. So yeah, she's a lucky girl, isn't she? So, but yeah, it was an absolutely brilliant. We had, of course, you had the absolute calamity qualifying where no one got a lap in apart from Carlos Sainz. Equally, you had the same in F3 where I think you had about 30 cars all going down the back straight, all trying to find space, and no one getting a lap. It's just the weekend was chaos. It was absolute brilliance. It gets an A plus from me. Now, on to very different from Italy, where, of course, we're wide open straights down to heavy braking zones, and we go back to the streets of Singapore. Now, what have you got the Singapore Grand Prix?
I've given it a C plus. I could even possibly give it a B. It was a bit crazy, wasn't it? We had three safety cars during the race. It was a bit all over the place, and it was eventually the opportunity for Sebastian Vettel to finally get that race victory he's been craving for, and he was very opportunistic in this race. He seized the moment and never really looked back. And with his teammate Charles Leclerc just a couple of seconds behind, Charles Leclerc was desperate for this race. To win this race, and it was a bit moany on the radio, but ultimately it was Ferrari's best race of the season, picking up a 1-2 with Max Verstappen not too far behind in third, and for once seeing Mercedes, it's crazy to say this, but in a lowly P4 and P5, it was a bit crazy. We had cars in the wall. I remember Grosjean driving George Russell into the wall, which caused one of the safety cars. And yeah, it's one of those Singapore races like we've had in many past where you just don't quite know what's going to happen, and it's definitely not one of the worst ones we've had there. So easily a C plus for me, maybe even a B.
Yeah, I mean, I've got it as a C. Um, Probably on the same sort of way as you've got it, but I was slightly disappointed in this one. I thought the pace was not great because obviously they were looking after the tyres, so they slowed down the entire race. And you heard back after the race Alex Albon saying that he felt like he could go faster, but he couldn't go faster because obviously then he'd take life out of the tyres, and it was frustrating to have to sit behind the entire time. Then obviously the Ferrari swapped over, and after dominating in qualifying in the race, Charles Leclerc then had to settle for being behind Seb. So this was sort of really that race that I think kick-started the what was really after winning the previous two races, Charles starting to take the lead in this Ferrari team as the future number one. So yeah, it was a frustrating race to watch because there was probably so much more we could have seen from it. But it's a C for me. Um, Over to Russia. What have you got the Russian Grand Prix?
I've given it a D. I didn't really enjoy the Russian Grand Prix. I think this was they'd already been moaning at each other building up to this, but I think this is where it started to really unravel with the relationship between Charles and Seb. Seb getting a jump on Charles early on, didn't he? And then didn't give the place back what apparently was planned, but because Seb kept pumping in these fastest laps that he couldn't really give the position back, and then unfortunately his breakdown, or was it surely after he pitted, his breakdown, which pretty much gifted a Mercedes a 1-2. Mercedes didn't look like they were ever going to get a 1-2, never mind a victory, and somehow Ferrari managed to mess things up for themselves, and a 1-2 for themselves, what should have been the case, ended up being a third and a DNF, and it was pretty miserable in the end, the race. The Russian Grand Prix has never been great, I'll be honest with you. It's just never appealed to me at all, so yeah, I'm going to give it a D.
Yeah, I mean, I've also got it as a D. Yeah, another frustrating race to watch. Like you said, it was the tensions in Ferrari was building because was this payback with from the qualifying in Italy, a few races previous, where Charles was meant to pull Seb round for that second lap, but of course got caught in the shuffle and wasn't able to go fast enough to get across the line in time. So Seb didn't really feel inclined to give him the position back equally. So yeah, it was his engine failure that brought this VSA out, that the gift the win back to Mercedes. So this was really another one of Ferrari shooting themselves in the foot. But yeah, like you say, the Russian Grand Prix not great. They've been talking about maybe moving it to St. Petersburg or to a different circuit that's actually got a little bit of life to it, because it just has nothing, doesn't it? It's very much like a car park. It's of course around the Sochi Autodrome, the former Winter Olympic site, and it's not great. You don't even really see any fans there. There's only really 2 stands that you actually notice around the track, so it's not even got that sort of feel to it where it's the fans are really getting involved as well. So I've got it as a D. Over to the land of the rising sun, Japan. What have you got for the Japanese Grand Prix?
I've got a D. Again, I didn't particularly enjoy this race. It's one of those tracks as well where it's hard, isn't it, to overtake round here, as we've discussed before. We've seen some weird incidences as well, didn't we, around the track, which should have really been given as penalties, but weren't. And like we've discussed, the race stewards weren't really that up to scratch this weekend either. And with Valtteri Bottas claiming the victory, they also claimed the constructors' title as well. I think that weekend as well, Mercedes. So yeah, it wasn't great. I'd say in terms of Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz, it was a good race in the end for those two, 4th and 5th, but not good at all. I think Japan's starting to get a trend now of it being not good, just because it's notoriously difficult to overtake around there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a circuit of corners, which usually doesn't invite a lot of overtaking. I've got it as a D plus. I didn't think it was a particularly interesting race. Valtteri took the win. Lewis just couldn't get past Seb. Tried everything to get past him and couldn't. So it was not a great race. I'm not a massive fan of Suzuka, although it is a iconic circuit. I think it's losing that sort of touch with these new cars, and you saw Charles Leclerc going one-handed around 130R, so that proves that it's not particularly taking the toll on the car. Like you see some guys get out of the car in Singapore and they're dripping with sweat because the humidity levels, and equally you had the same back in like Malaysia, but it's not like they're back in the day. In the 80s and 90s, they'd be getting out of the car in Suzuka, and the guys would be just almost not be able to function properly. But it was no issue at all. So a disappointing race in Japan this year. I've got it as a D. Over to Mexico. What have you got the Mexican Grand Prix?
I've got the Mexican Grand Prix as a B. It was it's a pretty good race. Lewis Hamilton, once again, he's ever so dominant, got the race victory, but he was run close, wasn't he, by Sebastian Vettel in the end. It was just a couple of seconds, I believe, between them two, and Bottas coming home in 3rd. Alex Albon again had another strong race for himself in that Red Bull, and Mexico it's starting to become a fan favourite now. I know a few people who have been and really enjoyed it, and Mexico, they know how to put on a good show, and I think this wasn't a bad race, so I give it a B.
Yep, I mean I think it's quite middle of the road. I've got B minus. I thought it was a good race to watch. It wasn't anything spectacular. Like you say, it was a good result for Lewis, just about held off Seb. Valtteri did what he needed to do to keep the championship alive by coming in 3rd, but it was pretty much meant, I think Lewis needed 2 points in the USA for the next race. It was an alright race. Mexico can throw up some decent ones. It can throw up a little bit of average here and there, and I think this one swayed more towards average. But USA next, north of the border. What have you got for the USA?
I've given it a C minus. It wasn't great, really. Bottas claiming the race win. He just about got past Lewis, didn't he? In the end, did Lewis go on that one stop, if I remember? He was crowned, obviously, the world champion that weekend. Lewis Hamilton, again, congratulations to him. He just about held off a flying Max Verstappen, didn't he? And if it wasn't for that Kevin Magnussen car sat in the gravel. I think Max might have just pipped him in the end, but it was another race what we thought Ferrari might go well at because it being a power circuit, and they were absolutely nowhere, were they? Charles Leclerc coming home in fourth, 52 seconds behind Bottas, but overall it wasn't one of the best USA Grand Prix, so yeah, C minus.
Yeah, I've got it as a C. It was like you say, it was a good race, but there were frustrating parts, and the frustrating parts are what kind of have brought this grade down. You had, of course, Seb Vettel had the broken rear suspension after hitting the curb too hard at turn 9, I think it was, yeah, like you say, Max couldn't get past Lewis at the end of the race due to the VS or the yellow double yellows at the end of the straight, and equally Lando Norris couldn't get past Daniel Ricciardo for 6th position, so it was another 6th place for Daniel Ricciardo in 6th. Yeah, it was a frustrating end to the race, but Valtteri taking the win, but Lewis wrapping up his 6th World Championship. And he then would go on into Brazil. And what have you got for us for Brazil?
A+, best race of the season. That might be biased. That might be biased, but I do not care. Now, the first 30 odd laps, you thought it was just a procession. Not really much was happening, and you thought, oh, here we go. It's just gonna meander out to a race result. But it just then all kicked off, didn't it? And as we've previously discussed, it was just absolutely chaotic for the last 15, 18 laps or so, and to just the highlights for like Carlos Sainz picking up a podium 3 hours or so after the race result, Pierre Gasly out dragging Lewis Hamilton to the line, and both Ferraris crashing into each other. It went from having nothing to having everything, all in a split second. And yeah, I might be biased, but it is for me. It is race of the season, A+.
I've got it as an A. Wonder why you went for an A+, but yeah, it is an A for me. It was it was on a par, I think, with Germany, with the best race of the season. And although I've got Belgium up there as an A as well, that was more for the emotional side of the season. And equally, I've got Italy as an A+, which technically is my best of the season. But for fundamentally watching the racing, I think Brazil is up there. The only reason I've got it as an A is not as an A+, is the first kind of stagings of the race weren't great. You did see Max Verstappen obviously have a good go at Lewis Hamilton, and then it became a little bit of a strategic battle. But when those safety cars came out, my oh my, it really did give us what an end to that race. And of course, it was absolutely devastating with Lewis colliding with Alex Albon on the last lap, or the second to last lap, costing Alex a podium. Then, like you said, that drag between Pierre Gasly and his radio after the race, and it was just, I mean, we did a podcast a few weeks ago about why couldn't have that been the last race of the season, and it would have been an absolutely brilliant way to end the season. But yeah, I've gone for an A for Brazil. But talking about ending of the season, we come to a final race, and at what is unquestionably the greatest circuit on the planet, where the storied history, some of the most fantastic races of all time have taken place here. Abu Dhabi. What have you got, Abu Dhabi?
I did not detect any sarcasm in your voice whatsoever, Ben. I've actually given Abu Dhabi a C. There has been terrible races at Abu Dhabi, I will agree with you, but this was by far not the worst. It was fascinating to see the race with no DRS for, was it 19, 20 laps or however long we had it, to see the cars actually running so closely as they did, and we got some genuine overtakes and a lot closer battles. And yes, when the DRS did eventually kick in, it brought out those easy moves for everybody. Unfortunately, my big bugbear with F1 in general this season, over the whole season, is their lack of willing to show battles further down the grid. Is very frustrating for me. you had Lewis, who absolutely dominated the race weekend, but F1 was watching a battle that was going nowhere, yet you had a superb battle between both the Renaults and both the McLarens further back, fighting over the last few points positions, and then Carlos Sainz needing that 1 point to claim P6 in the championship, and we never got to see it live on the TV. It was incredibly frustrating to see that, and I think it's for me it's one of the frustrations of F1 this season. Their coverage has been very poor, and Abu Dhabi proved it once again here, and I think it probably would have got a better rating from me if we'd have seen some of the battles, what did happen in the race, what we never got to see. We eventually had to see him on the internet through video clips, which is never quite the same, is it? You want to see it during live. So for me, it definitely was not the worst race of the season. It wasn't the best race either. So middle of the road C. I am dreading to hear what you have to say now.
Well, if I could have one of those neuralizers that they have in Men in Black that wipes the memory of everyone, it would be for anyone that thinks that. I'd just do it for Chase Carey at Formula One and just tell him straight afterwards, we do not race at Abu Dhabi. We do not need to race at Abu Dhabi. Forget the money. There is nothing exciting about the races there. And if the most exciting thing about your race is that DRS didn't work, it's not a good race. Yes, it was an interesting end that was completely ruined by the fact that the TV coverage, as you say, has been woeful. And if you've watched the highlights back from Alex Jakes and Davide Valsecchi doing the F1 video, it's superb. And Alex Jakes is, I think, probably at the moment the best F1 and racing commentator in motorsport. He is fantastic, and it was such a shame that we didn't get to see the end with Sergio Perez pulling off supposedly the greatest move in his career, which is crazy because it wasn't that good. He went around the outside at a chicane on a driver that had much worse tyres. It just wasn't very interesting. The track layout is a track layout made for children by children. I think if you're not a fan of Jimmy Broadbent, I would suggest you go and subscribe to him on Twitter and YouTube. He's a brilliant sim racer, and his little rant on the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and the track layout is pretty much how I think about it as well. He just saying how a hotel and fireworks does not make a good event, and I could not agree more. It was a shame that we had to end there because glitz and glamour means nothing if you have a poor race, and unfortunately it was an E for me. It was not a great race. It was not a great way to end the season. It was frustrating with the TV coverage, and it was it's everyone knows my thoughts on the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. If you want to have it in the season, fine. If we have to have it, I mean, we have to have Russia and France, but put it somewhere else. Put it in, I don't know, after Bahrain or before Bahrain or anywhere. I don't know. just don't have it the last race of the season because it's just so boring. But yeah, it's an E grade for me.
And on that note, it's now Christmas. No, I'm joking. I didn't think you were ever going to stop then, I'll be honest. I know your passion for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. You just can't contain yourself.
No, yeah, well, yeah. Maybe I'll be turned. Maybe next season there'll be the race of the century and we'll have a 17-car battle for the lead and into the final lap or something. But yeah, that's us. That's our grading the races, and that's taken much longer than what I thought it would.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, guys. And we'll quickly go through the drivers, and so we'll start off with Sab with your McLaren, your Mercedes drivers. What have you graded your Mercedes drivers for the season?
I've gave Hamilton an A and Bottas a C. Hamilton is expected, in my opinion, to win races, win world championships in that car. He is lightning fast in that car. He's got the world championship wrapped up, so he's done exactly what he's expected of him. Bottas a C+, simply because he was great at the first half of the season, petered out a little bit in the middle, and got better again towards the end. So not great, not bad. but improved from last year, so C plus for Bottas.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've got Hamilton as an A, and I've got Bottas as a B. I think Hamilton goes down as unquestionably one of the greatest of all time. Bottas had a little bit of a fight in him, just lost it in the midpoint of the season, came back in the second half, but it did make us think that we could have had a championship fight. On to the Ferraris. What have you got Ferraris?
Ferraris, I have got Seb a D plus and Charles a C. Seb, arguably one of his worst seasons in Formula One. He's admitted himself he's made too many mistakes this season. He's been unlucky as well, I'd say, so that's why I gave him a plus. But overall, it's not been a good season for Seb. Not been a good season in general, I'd say, for Ferrari. Charles, he's had some standout races this season, and you have to applaud him on that. But I think he's made too many mistakes over the season this season, and he's tried to make too many excuses as well, fighting with his teammates and squabbling over different bits and bobs. So a C minus for him. It's not been very good for Ferrari.
No, not a great season for Ferrari. I've got a C for Vettel and a B for Leclerc. I think it has been a really bad season for Seb. Whether it be mistakes, I mean, he's made quite a few this season, whether it be issues with the car and equally just personal motivation. Yeah, I don't think it's been a great season for him. Charles Leclerc, it's been a good season. He has made a couple of mistakes, which is why he's not any higher. Couple of race wins and some decent points in the championship, but not and also finishing above Seb. Seb finishing 5th in the championship, which is not great at all. But yeah, a C for Vettel and a B for Leclerc. What have you got for the Red Bulls?
So I've gone with Max, and A. He's been absolutely superb this season. He had a little dip, didn't he, in the middle of the season for a few races, but overall Max has been absolutely superb once again. He's got the maximum out of that Honda-powered Red Bull this year. I personally didn't expect Red Bull to be getting race victories this season with the Honda power, but Max has done it. And Alex Albon, he's been absolutely superb coming into the second half of the season with that Red Bull. I've given him a B minus. He made a few mistakes early on in the season in his Toro Rosso days. He had a crash, I think it was at China, and a few other bits. But overall, I think Alex Albon's been absolutely superb. And for me, the only reason why I've given him a B minus is he just needs to get that little bit closer to Max. But I'm sure that's just me nitpicking. I'm sure he'll become better over the winter break. So Max A, Alex B minus.
Yeah, I mean, I've got Max as an A minus. I think just misses out on that A with a couple of mistakes in the season and a couple of races that probably couldn't have gone his way. Of course, he had that incident in Belgium and broke his front suspension. That cost him probably a decent result there. Alex, I've gone a C plus. Could have been a B minus, could have been a B. I'm a big fan of Alex's. Really like his demeanour, really like the way he drives the car. Like you said, he's made a few mistakes. He crashed in China. He's crashed a couple of times in practice and in qualifying. He just needs to iron out those mistakes, and he needs about 2 or 3 tenths. He just needs to get maybe within a tenth of Max. At the moment, he's about 2 or 3 tenths off of him. So yeah, I've got him as a C plus at the moment. But I do think that he can if he can just get a little bit quicker, get used to the car, he can possibly go a little bit closer. Maybe not challenge Max, but go a little bit closer to him next season. What have you got your boys in the McLarens?
This is going to sound incredibly biased, but if you let me explain, it might make sense. I've gone with Carlos's. For me, Carlos's driver of the season, I've given him an A+, and I've given Lando a B. The reason why I've given Carlos driver of the season, not because he drives for my favourite team, it's because he went into that team completely unknown whether the McLaren were going to perform this season after what was a very poor season last season with Fernando and Stoffel with the Renault engine in. They've come into this season with a fresh look. The team dynamic has been absolutely superb. They've both got along. The team has just gone on a massive upwards trend, and Carlos has drove absolutely superbly. He got that podium in Brazil, as we just spoke about. He got some excellent fifth places as well, and drove superbly in Austria as well. So Carlos in that car when nobody really was expecting it to finish P6 in the championship is absolutely mighty. So for me, he's driver of the season, A+. And Lando, he's had a solid year. He's been desperately unlucky. Belgium, when his car broke down when he was in P5, and he had an issue in France and a few other places as well. He could have scored a lot more points if he didn't have the reliability issues he had. And when he was on form, Lando was right up there, and he did well in Abu Dhabi as well. So a B for him.
Yeah, I mean, I've got Carlos as an A. Fantastic season for him. Really, really good. He's completely changed my opinion of him. Coming into McLaren, I thought, oh, he's an average driver. And I thought Lando would be beating him, if not more, matching him, if not beating him. So yeah, he's absolutely blown me away with my expectations. Lando, I've got a B to B minus. I think that we haven't quite seen his full ability just yet. He's had a lot of reliability issues, a lot of little things happen here and there, and I do think that maybe towards the end of the season that you saw in Abu Dhabi, he was saying that he needs to stop being so nice. And I think that next season we might see a little bit more elbows out from Lando, because I think he realises that it's very well to be everyone's best friend on the grid and to be the funny driver that everyone laughs at, but to really get that tenacious and winning mentality, he needs to be more like Lewis Hamilton and be a little bit more robotic. You see that from the likes of George Russell. It was just a little bit more. It's very good. He's completely transformed the paddock with how they are and how they interact with each other, which is brilliant. I'm so glad the McLaren boys have done this season, but I think Lando just for next season just needs to wind it in a little bit and just hopefully the car works for him and he'll be able to finish a little bit further up, because at the moment he finished 11th in the driver championship. So yes, so I mean car issues does come into that, but equally Carlos was beating him quite comfortably in the midpoint of the season. So yeah, it's an A for Carlos, it's a B for Lando. What have you got for the Renaults?
I've gone with Daniel Ricciardo a C and Nico Hulkenberg a D. I think the Renaults have been quite disappointing this year after a solid season they had the previous year. Daniel Ricciardo, he's pulled out some good results in that Renault. In the end, he got that P6 in the USA, and he's done all right, but he's not probably done what he could have probably expected from that car. And Nico Hulkenberg, I think he's been quite disappointing this year. It's a shame to see him leave Formula One, but ultimately I'm not really surprised with the emergence of young talent coming through in F1. And Nico Hulkenberg, he's an early man, isn't he? And this season it's been quite more of that this year, and unfortunately he's been beaten by his teammates. So yeah, a D for Nico.
Yeah, I've got a C plus across the board for both Renault drivers. I don't think really, although Daniel did have a couple of decent results in sixth a couple of times, it's just been a bit of a rubbish season for Renault. So yeah, a bit of an average season all around for both drivers. A shame to see Nico go out in a car that's not really as competitive as Renault probably thought it would be. So yeah, C plus for both drivers. What have you got for the racing points?
I've got Sergio Perez a C and Lance Stroll a D. I think Sergio Perez was quite average at the start of the year, but since the summer break he's been absolutely superb in that racing point, and he's comfortably beating his teammate Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll, he frustrates me, Lance Stroll, because his qualifying has been always consistently quite poor, but then when it comes to race trim, he seems to not do too bad. If he could rectify that, he might be much closer to his teammate. But Lance Stroll, he's not really done much at all in that car, to be honest. So a C and a D for those two for me.
I've got a B minus for Sergio. I think Sergio's had a pretty decent season. Putting it in, if you look at the car in a whole, it's Sergio's getting the most out of it and Lance is getting the least out of it. If Stroll is struggling to get out of Q1 and Sergio's getting it into Q3 in a couple of occasions, and so yeah, I've got it's a good season with the equipment for Sergio. B minus for him. Stroll, I've got a D minus. He has a real issue in qualifying. Turns it up in the races somewhat, but not enough to really give himself a better grade. It's a must do better. Unfortunately, the fact that his dad owns the team is probably not going to cost himself any positions in the team. But yeah, they'll be hoping that he can start to pick up the pace a little bit next season. What have you got for the Toro Rossos?
Right, so the Toro Rossos, where are they? Right, see, I've given them both a C because Gasly was, yeah, it was, let's be polite, poor first half of the season. I think we were expecting probably what Alex has done in that Red Bull, but since Gasly's gone back to familiar surroundings in that Toro Rosso, I think he's been absolutely superb. He got that second place in Brazil, and with Danny Kvyat, he's not been great, but he's also picked up good results as well. He got a podium as well in Germany, so that pair next season, I think, could go well next year. Gasly is clearly more suited to the less pressure of being in a Toro Rosso car, and Danny Kvyat, if he could just cut out a few more mistakes, I think them two could be a decent lineup in the Alpha Touring next season. So C's across the board for me.
Yeah, I've got a B for Danny Kvyat. I thought he's had a pretty decent standard compared to what we've seen from him in the past, and I think there was a lot of stigma when he came back going into the team that he might have a bit of a shocker. But yeah, he's had some decent results. To get on the podium was huge for him. I've got Gasly, I've got as a C minus. Now that probably could be a C. I'm being a little bit harsh here, but I'm taking more into account of what he was like at Red Bull at the start of the season as well. And although he did obviously turn it back on and have some really good results at the end of the season, that first half of the season he was just he was so soundly beaten race after race after race. So it did somewhat cloud that judgment there of him. But yeah, it's a B for Danny Kvyat and a C minus for Pierre Gasly. Oh, the Haas. They've had a dreadful season.
They have had a dreadful season. I've gone with Kevin a D and Roman Grosjean an E. I think Kevin, the only reason why I give him a D is he's comfortably outscored his teammate yet again. I am amazed Roman Grosjean has been given the seat yet again in that car. All he's done all season is moan. Yes, that car is not good, but Roman Grosjean doesn't help himself at times. He always seems to find trouble wherever he goes. He even crashed in the pit lane at Silverstone, didn't he? So yeah, I think given a better car, I think Kevin Magnussen could probably do better. But ultimately, I don't think either of them have really had a very good season. So a D and an E for me.
Yeah, I've got a D for Kevin Magnussen, a D minus for Grosjean. Poor season with sponsors on the track, off the track. Both the car has just been dreadful. Not a great season for both. Grosjean is not equally, only just shades having a worse season than Kevin, but yeah, not too much more to say about that. D for Magnussen, D for Grosjean. And finally, what have you got for the really disappointing Williams this season?
I've given George a B plus. It could even potentially be an A. I think George Russell has been absolutely superb this season, despite the car he's been in. He's 21-0 in qualifying. I can imagine he'd be very frustrated the fact that his teammate has outscored him this year, because his teammate Robert Kubica, don't believe he should have ever come back. He's been woeful at best. Sometimes 2 laps off the pace, and he just never, this romantic idea of Robert Kubica coming back, the once tipped future world champion, and it's just never worked out. I've given Robert Kubica an E. I don't believe he should have ever come back. I think what they should have done in that Williams is what they've done for next year, and bring someone in like Latifi alongside George Russell, somebody who can potentially push George Russell and challenge him as well, and help with the youth side of the team try and go forward. So yeah, I've given George a B plus. It could easily be an A, and Robert Kubica an E.
Yeah, I mean, I've got the same for Robert Kubica. I've got him as an E. It's just been a disaster for him. The experiment of bringing him back hasn't worked, and yes, it was nice to see him back, and it was a great comeback story, but it just wasn't to be comfortably a second slower than George Russell. And although the irony is that he managed to pick up that point in Germany and George didn't. But yeah, it's a poor season for Robert. He'll be disappointed with how it's gone, but I don't think he would have been any more competitive in a different car. So I don't think he can really blame it on the Williams. He's been soundly beaten by his teammate. George Russell I've got as a B to B plus. Fantastic season for him. Frustrating as coming in as an F2 champion. He couldn't compete like he saw that Alex and Lando did, but beating his teammate, what was it, 21-0, whatever it was in the qualifying, and equally in the races, he was soundly faster than Robert. Had a fantastic race in I think it was Hungary, and equally in qualifying he missed out getting into Q2 by less than half a tenth. So yeah, George Russell gets a B, and session finished, classes dismissed. That's us graded all the races and all of the teams as a whole. Sab, what are you grading this season?
Oh, that's a tough question. I never thought about it. Like, I'd give it. See, you've got to try and forget about how dominant Mercedes were, and I'm probably going to get it between a B minus and a C. I think if we'd have had more of the second half of the season in the first half of the season, I'd have comfortably given it a B or B plus. I think because of what Mercedes did, I can't complain at them. They've got the job absolutely superb. Everybody's got to catch up with them. It's their job. If Mercedes is so much better, it's their job to catch up. But Mercedes, because how dominant they were, it for me, I kind of switched off from it a little bit because you want it to be more competitive. So because it was pretty much already wrapped up towards the middle half of the season, that's probably why I'll probably get a B minus, C plus C, something like that, because we had some great races, but ultimately I think we had a lot of average races and a lot of poor races. So yeah, middle of the road, I'd say.
Yeah, I've got it as a B minus. Like you say, the good did feel like it outweighed the bad a little bit, but yeah, the championship was over effectively the halfway stage of the season, so that's what has really brought it down. But yeah, we did have some really good races, some really fun moments, and yeah, some races that people won't forget for a while. So yeah, a B minus for me for the 2019 World Championship. And that's us done for all of the F1 talk for the 2019 season. And now we'll just quickly run through. Of course, we are Invictus Racing League. This is what the podcast has come from. And we are an esports F1 2019 esports league on PS4. And we do run 4 leagues over the week. So we'll quickly run over the winners of the races over the last week or so. 4 races. Monday night is our IRL F1 League, the fastest of our leagues, and these guys using no assists, and it is brand new driver Hercules took the win ahead of FPL Charlie, of course last season's no assist champion, and Jumpalainen the winner of the first 2 races in third. And yeah, good race of Hercules.
It was a good race, and I'd also like to point out it was a good debut for TNF Owen as well. He grabbed a superb pole position. I'll be honest, I didn't expect it at all. I was pretty much unknown from him, and Charlie will be disappointed, I think. He's come out and said that it felt like a race victory for him, but that penalty cost him the opportunity for his first race victory, and Hercules was there to take it from him, and Hercules absolutely superb in that Red Bull. He's definitely looked like he's going to be one to watch this season, because our early pace setter John Purline, funny to say, only finished in third this race. So yeah, he might have some work to do finally.
Yeah, and it's going to be the talent in F1 is ramping up week upon week upon week, and you can watch that with Sab and I in the commentary box Monday nights 8 p.m. here on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Invictus Racing League. So make sure you go and subscribe to that and find out what's going on every Monday with Sab and I. And thanks for all the views, and we've had some really good interaction with it this season. And yeah, thanks guys. And equally, I'd like to say thank you for hitting 200 subscribers on YouTube. Absolutely mega, and something that we'd hope to do before Christmas. So yeah, really Massive props out to you guys that are watching the streams and watching the races. Hope you're enjoying it, and equally hope you stick with us and head us through to the next 100. On to Tuesday nights, Tim and Malc in the commentary box for the Realistic Performance League, and it was won on track by Sir Spud, dropped down to second position on penalties. Simon took the win, and then Aaron JS 1992 in third position. How did you find the race?
I enjoyed the race myself. I had a superb battle with Ton Albanek and Ozone fighting for P6. We were nose to tail crossing the finish line. Congratulations to Simon in his McLaren. He got pole position and eventually took the race victory. He'll be delighted with that because Simon's had a few tough races of late, and to finally get up there and take the race victory must feel very good. So yeah, it was a good race in the Performance League Tuesday night. One I do recommend watching back. Performance League always brings up good race results, and no doubt next week when the allocations are set, we should have a completely different look for next week. But yeah, good race.
Yeah, and that is of course on Tuesdays with Malc and Tim in the commentary box. F2 Wednesday nights, IRL F2 and F3, and F2 was won for a third time in a row by Lozak, and Lozak finishing ahead of Ferocious Dan. Aaron spinning and crashing out and costing himself decent points in the championship, which allowed TB to finish on the podium. So it's a third win in a row for Lozak.
Yeah, Lozak's looking mighty, and he might have one eye on some records in the Invictus records here with 3 wins. He'll be eyeing up a 4th race victory. He'll be very happy that his teammate got on the podium, TB. So strong result for them in the constructors standings, and also I'd say a strong result for the Red Bull team of Easty Mats and MJ Coop coming home in 4th and 5th in the end. But yeah, Lozak is definitely one who needs to be beat this season. Can anybody beat him? Ferocious Dan was very close, but not quite there.
No, and it does look like Lozak is definitely the man to beat. So see if anyone can do that next week, and that is, of course, Warrislander and Dan in the commentary box for that on Wednesday nights 8 p.m. on YouTube. And finally, F3 with Tim and Malc in the commentary box. It was Mike, Nitrogash and F1 Richard rounding out what was probably the oldest podium in Invictus history. There was some very veteran drivers in that podium there. But yeah, a good win for Mike, a track that he's usually pretty strong at.
Yeah, Mike, he's a good racer, and you don't often. One thing I always find with Mike is you don't often get a penalty off Mike, so you've really got to earn your race victories if you're going to beat him. And he is great round the British Grand Prix round Silverstone. Mike, a veteran of the F3, like you say, he's always up there in and around the podium, isn't he? So big congratulations to him. I don't think they'd appreciate quite so much that you're one of the oldest podiums, but I definitely get what you mean. Nigel Gash, he's a good racer on his day. Again, he's been one of those who's had a tough start to the season in performance as well. So good for him to get on a podium.
Yeah. And of course, like I said, that was Tim and Malc going from Tuesdays to Wednesdays commentary box on for F3. And like I said, you can watch all those races by going to youtube.com/Invictus Racing League. Subscribe to the channel and ding the bell to be notified when we go live for all 4 races. And yeah, so that is us done for round 3. So round 4 next week will be in Russia for the Sochi Autodrome. We said it's a bit of a car park. We're going to see what it's like driving around a car park. So we'll be heading there next week for round 4. And as we wrap up and we get towards the end of the stream, we've realised it's gone a little bit longer. It was always going to go long when you're reviewing an entire 20-plus race calendar with drivers as well. So we hope you've stuck with us for the entire thing and you've enjoyed it. But we, of course, will go to the final segment of the podcast, and it will be for a final time because we will be coming back in the new year with a new format and a couple of other things, perhaps even a new name. So look out for that in the coming weeks and months. But it is the final hot lap question, and Sab, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you the first time we asked the hot lap question. And I want to see if your answer is exactly the same, and if you can remember what your original answer was.
I can't even remember the question.
So back in early June, back on episode 3, I asked you what your biggest disappointment of the season was, and so that would have been I believe it was at just before the French Grand Prix. What your biggest disappointment of the season was? Can you remember what your answer was?
I can't remember. I genuinely cannot remember. Can we pause the podcast briefly while I rewind and find out what I said? I genuinely cannot remember.
So at the time, you said there wasn't enough competition for wins, and but would you now change that? What is the disappointment of the season?
I'd still probably agree with that. I'd say also Ferrari, even though I'm not a fan of Ferrari, I think for me it's been disappointing to see them like they are. They seem to implode on themselves, and the spat between drivers and everything else. You fully expected them to be challenging this season, and it was anything but a title challenge this season from them. So I'd go along with partly what I previously said, but I'd also say a lot of it is Ferrari, because I expected a lot more from them this season.
Okay, and that is it's slightly similar to your original answer, so it's not too bad. But we don't want to end on a negative note. We don't want to end the season on a negative note. So what I will do is ask you for the final question: is what has been the best thing about this season?
Easily. I can tell you easy. Carlos Sainz getting the podium. No, honestly, I think what's been refreshing this year is, for me, not so much the battles at the front, but I think how close and how fantastic the midfield fight has been. You just don't know who's going to come out on top, race in and race out. And if we didn't have the big three, you'd have had a superb F1 season this season. You would never have predicted who would have took the title, and it just shows you how small margins there is between the likes of McLaren, Renault, Racing Point, Toro Rosso, Alfa Romeo, and everybody else mixed in there. One week Alfa Romeo was right up there, another week was Renault, McLaren. You just never knew who was going to come out on top. So that midfield battle for me was one of the biggest highlights, just because it was really fun to watch the fact that they could all race so closely and they were all quite evenly matched.
And that was, we end on a positive note. It ends the season in a nice way. Is that we did see a fantastic battle in the midfield. But yeah, guys, that is us done for the first season of the podcast, essentially. And although we will be back, don't worry, in 2 weeks' time for an Invictus Christmas special. And Sav and I will sit down around the fireplace and we'll write out a Christmas list of 3 things to ask Santa for things that we want for Formula One in the future. So come and join us on the 19th of December for a very Christmassy Invictus F1 podcast. But apart from that, we'll be back next year for pre-season, a pre-season special in February, and then of course we'll be back just before the Australian Grand Prix in March. So yeah, just a little bit of a gap for you to recharge, get ready for the new season, and we'll be bringing you weekly content and weekly podcasts all the way through the 2020 season. And of course, guys, as always, thanks for joining us. You can follow us on Twitter at GT2_driving for myself, at Alan Sabatino for Sab, of course, and you can go to at Invictus RL on Twitter and Instagram, and Invictus Racing League on Facebook to find out more about the esports league. And of course, guys, make sure you go to the website invictusracingleague.com to find out all the tables and sign up to get yourself on the grid for the F1 2019 game as we head towards the new year, and F1 2020, which will be announced probably in the next few weeks or so. So yeah, exciting times coming up with the podcast. Big news coming in the next few weeks, as I said, and so make sure you stay tuned to all of that on the socials. Have a great week, guys. We will see you in a few weeks' time for the Christmas special, and have a good one. Have a and apart from that, Sab, a final word on the first half or the first season done as we wrap it up.
Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of this podcast. I'll be honest, I didn't quite expect it to go as well as it has done, just solely because of something I've never done before. Something that's always intrigued me, but I've been absolutely delighted with the response from friends and people listening and saying how much they enjoy this. It's absolutely great to hear that people enjoy what we ramble on about and our usual rubbish predictions. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoy it, and I cannot wait to get stuck into the Christmas special what we have coming up, and then it won't be long until we'll be getting into the February pre-season testing. So yeah, it's been absolutely superb. I cannot thank you enough for everything you've done to help make this possible. So yeah, let's hope all this great fun I've had in these past few months carry on, and we get even bigger and better going into next year.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't be anything without you on both Monday nights and on Thursdays, of course. But yeah, that is us done, guys. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this season. Well, like we said, we'll be back on the 19th of December for a Christmas special. Have a great week. Make sure you check out us on all the socials, and yeah, enjoy it, guys. See you later.